I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome to the Vietnam Veterans News Podcast. News of interest about Vietnam veterans from a Vietnam veteran. Now, here's your host, Mac Payne.
This is Mac Payne here with episode 1803 of the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast. News about the Vietnam War and the brave veterans who served there, as told to you by yours truly, a Vietnam veteran. This episode is brought to you by Legacy Staffs, which are crafted by the Brazos Walking Stick Company out in beautiful Waco, Texas. You can go to brazossticks.com and use my name, Mac Payne, one word, at the checkout and get a whopping 10% off of your next order of the Legacy Staff or cane of your own design. That is a deal I highly recommend you take advantage of. Remember, brazossticks.com. Use my name, Mac Payne, in one word, at the checkout and get that 10% discount. Don't delay. The boys out there in Waco just might decide to take that 10% offer off the table. Don't miss out. Once you get one of these Legacy Staffs, I'm sure it will become one of your most prized possessions. And I know because I have one. In this episode today, we're going to talk about one of my favorite aircraft in the Air Force inventory. And that is the B-52 bomber. They ceased production of this airplane back in 1962. It was designed back in the 1940s. Yet it is still with us to this day, flying missions in combat. I became a big fan of the B-52 over in Vietnam. Watching arc light strikes. Watching arc lights always caused me to say something like, "Good night, nurse and Chi-Chi bug. Look at all those bombs." I could not believe that one airplane could carry so many bombs. Those bombs just seemed to keep going on forever as they would explode in the jungles over there. That's when I became a really big fan of the B-52s. I like the B-52 bombers anyway, especially watching the movie Dr. Strangelove, as that brave Air Force pilot, played by Slim Pickens, flew on to drop his bomb at Russia. The good news is this: even though the B-52 has been flying for many, many years, it will continue to fly in the future, according to a story that appeared on the WRAL TechWire website. I'm going to share that story with you so that, just in case you are as big of a B-52 fan as I am, it will make you happy. The title of the story is Future War, Air Force to Phase Out B-2, but Keep Older B-52 as the new bomber comes online. The story was submitted by none other than Robert Burns. He is an AP National Security writer. He did a good job on this story. That's another reason I'm going to share it with you. Let's take a look at what Robert has to say about the B-52 and why they are not going to be retired to the boneyard right now. Eventually, they will be in that boneyard out west in the deserts of Arizona, but for the time being, they're going to continue flying missions. Let's take a look at the story. Dateline, Whiteman Air Force Base, Missouri. In the topsy-turvy world of U.S. strategic bombers, older and uglier sometimes beats newer and snazzier. As the Air Force charts a bomber future in line with the Pentagon's new focus on potential war with China or Russia, the youngest and flashiest, the stealthy B-2, costing a hair-raising $2 billion U.S. each, is going to be retired first. The oldest and stodgiest, The Vietnam-era B-52 will go last. It could still be flying when it's 100 years old. This might seem to defy logic, but the elite group of men and women who have flown the bat-winged B-2 Spirit accept the reasons for phasing it out when a next-generation bomber comes online. In my mind, it actually does make sense to have the B-2 as an eventual retirement candidate, says John Avery, who flew the B-2 for 14 years from Whiteman Air Force Base in western Missouri. He and his wife Jennifer were the first married couple to serve as B-2 pilots. She was the first woman to fly in combat. Now, isn't that nice? In this day and time, even married couples can fly bombers and kill hundreds of people on one mission. That's what I call equal opportunity. Continuing. The Air Force sees it as a matter of money, numbers, and strategy. The Air Force expects to spend at least $55 billion to field an all-new nuclear-capable bomber for the future, the B-21 Raider. At the same time, the Pentagon will be spending hundreds of billions of dollars to replace all of the other major elements of the nation's nuclear weapons arsenal. The Air Force also is spending heavily on new fighters and refueling aircraft, and like the rest of the military, it foresees tighter defense budgets ahead. A note here. Everybody gets all upset about the defense budget and how high it is. What they don't realize is, in addition to spending money on defense, it is also a tremendous economic generator in all those towns and cities where the people work who are making those airplanes and those bombs and all those other weapons. Not only is it good for the security of the nation, it's good for the economy. In Vietnam, I always realized that. As I was firing those 10-pound and 17-pound folding fin aerial rockets, I was thinking of all the people back in the States who were earning overtime wages making more of those rockets. I figured the faster I shot them up, the better it would be for the economy. That's what I call Mac Payne economics. Continuing with the story. The B-2's viability suffers from the fact that only 21 were built, of which 20 remain. That leaves little slack in the supply chain for unique spare parts. It is thus comparatively expensive to maintain and to fly. It also is seen as increasingly vulnerable against air defenses of emerging war threats like China. Then there is the fact that the B-52, which entered service in the mid-1950s and is known to the crews as the Big Ugly Fat Fellow, keeps finding ways to stay relevant. It is equipped to drop or launch the widest array of weapons in the entire Air Force inventory. The plane is so valuable that the Air Force twice in recent years has brought a B-52 back from the grave, taking long-retired planes from a desert boneyard in Arizona and restoring them to active service. Strategic bombers have a storied place in U.S. military history. From the early days of the former Strategic Air Command, when the only way America and the former Soviet Union could launch nuclear weapons at each other was by air, to the B-52's carpet-bombing missions in Vietnam. Pardon me, but it always gave me a thrill to see bombs seemingly falling out of the air, because you could not see the B-52s as they dropped the bombs. Continuing. Developed in secrecy in the 1980s, the B-2 was rolled out as a revolutionary weapon, the first long-range bomber built with stealth, or radar-evading technology designed to defeat the best Soviet air defenses. By the time the first B-2 was delivered to the Air Force in 1993, however, the Soviet Union had disintegrated and the Cold War had ended. Doesn't that just get your goat? We spend all this money on a special bomber just to bomb the Soviet Union, and then the Soviet Union falls apart and we don't have anybody to bomb with that aircraft. Maybe they can find somebody else. Continuing with the story. The B-2 bomber made its combat debut in the 1999 Kosovo War. It flew a limited number of combat sorties over Iraq and Afghanistan and has launched only 5 combat sorties since 2011, all in Libya. Doesn't that seem ridiculous? We've got a bomber that cost $2 billion to make, designed to bomb the Soviet Union, and what do? We use it to drop bombs on some camel pilots in Libya. I find that very interesting. Continuing. The last was a 2017 strike, notable for the fact that it pitted the world's most expensive and exotic bomber against a flimsy camp of Islamic State group militants. I hate to say it, well, that makes us look awfully ridiculous, in my opinion. Continuing. It has proved its worth in the fight over time, says Colonel Jeffrey Schreiner, who has flown the B-2 for 19 years and is commander of the 509th Bomb Wing at Whiteman, which flies and maintains the full fleet. But after 2 decades of fighting small wars and insurgencies, the Pentagon is shifting its main focus to what it calls great power competition with a rising China and a resurgent Russia, in an era of stiffer air defenses that expose B-2 vulnerabilities. Thus, the Pentagon's commitment to the bomber of the future, the B-21 Raider. The Air Force has committed to buying at least 100 of them. The plane is being developed in secrecy to be a do-it-all strategic bomber. A prototype is being built now, but the first flight is not considered likely before 2022. Bombers are legend, but their results are sometimes regretted. Like maybe the bombing of Dresden in World War II, where we bravely killed hundreds of thousands of German women and children. I think that was regrettable. Continuing with the story. A B-2 bomber scarred U.S.-China relations in 1999 when it bombed Beijing's embassy in the Serbian capital of Belgrade, killing 3 people. China denounced the attack as a barbaric act, while the U.S. insisted it was a grievous error. That war in Serbia, if you remember correctly, was the war put on by Bill Clinton to deflect attention from the affair he was having with the intern in the Oval Office. Continuing with Mr. Burns' story. The Air Force had planned to keep its B-2 bombers flying until 2058, but will retire them as the B-21 Raider arrives in this decade. Also retiring early will be the B-1B Lancer, which is the only one of the 3 bomber types that is no longer nuclear capable. The Air Force proposes to eliminate 17 of its 62 Lancers in the coming year. Makes one wonder, why does the Air Force have bombers that are not nuclear capable? Continuing with Mr. Burns' story. The B-52, however, will fly on. It is so old, it made a mark on American pop culture more than a half a century ago. It lent its name to the 1960s beehive hairstyle that resembled the plane's nose cone, and the plane featured prominently in Stanley Kubrick's 1964 black comedy, Dr. Strangelove. One of my favorite movies of all times. More than once, the B-52 seemed destined to go out of style. We're talking about a plane that ceased production in 1962, based on a design that was formulated in the late 1940s, says Lauren Thompson, a defense analyst at the Lexington Institute, a Washington think tank. You ever wonder how you get into one of these think tanks where you just sit around all day thinking and writing and they pay you money? As Jerry Clower once said, there's a banker out in Jackson, Mississippi, what wants me to get in on one of those deals. Continuing with the story. Rather than retire the B-52, the Air Force is planning to equip the Boeing behemoth with new engines, new radar technology, and other upgrades to keep it flying into the 2050s. It will be a standoff platform from which to launch cruise missiles and other weapons from beyond the reach of hostile air defenses. In Thompson's view, the Air Force is making a simple calculation. The B-52 cost far less to operate and maintain than the newer but finickier B-2s. They decided the B-52 was good enough, he says. I'll second that statement. The B-52 was good enough, and it still is good enough for today and into the future, especially when you consider all the high-tech armaments you can hang on those wide wings and what they can do. That is the story on why the B-52s have gained new life with the Air Force. All those other fancy bombers like the B-2s and the B-1s and all the rest of them, they're too expensive and too technical to operate. You take the good old B-52 and it'll just keep running forever. And as long as it keeps running, I will still see those magnificent arc lights going off in Vietnam. I call them bombs forever. They seem to never quit bombing. Now you have the latest on the B-52 story. It is a story that is going to stay with us for a little while longer, and I, for one, am glad of it. This is Mac Payne closing out episode 1803 of the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast. Thank you so much for coming to listen. You are cordially invited to come again soon and often to listen to more coming your way on this podcast, the Vietnam Veteran News.
How about that? Ain't that a mess?